Hey everybody, hope you're all doing well. My name is Steven and this is the Storytime channel. Today we have some malicious compliance stories, and our first story of the day is by Bales D'Acier, which means steel balls in English, by the way. Don't want to hire me? Okay then, I'll let you think that over. Here's another tale related to me by a coworker. I might not have all the details correct, but here we go. To understand the setting, you need to know what a cross-docker is. That's a logistics company that ships LTL loads, less than truckload. So let's say that you have a customer that has 2 skids for city A, 3 skids for city B, and a skid for city C. You go to the customer, pick up all of his shipments, then put them in with the other orders for their respective cities. The freight moves across the dock into its destination container. With this arrangement, you spend the day running around, picking up orders. Late in the afternoon, the loads start to arrive at the warehouse and the fun begins. The dock crew worked 4 p.m. to midnight, sometimes later, depending on volume. Let's call my friend Charlie. He was a temp in the dispatch office. When he was hired, it was staffed by old manager, manager's nephew, and a day dispatcher who set up the pickups. That was the day shift. Charlie was the afternoon shift, along with 2 data entry clerks. So the dock would load a container destined for a particular city. They hand the folder with the waybills for each of the shipments in the container to data entry, who get it into the server and generate a manifest. Most of these containers were intermodal, and they were shipped out by train. You've seen ships with containers piled on them? Same thing, except for domestic shipments, they would use 53-foot containers rather than the 40-foot containers you see on boats. Charlie would take the folder and then verify that everything in the container was headed for the correct city, check for temperature-controlled freight, check for dangerous goods, and make certain the container was placarded correctly. Then he would go online and check the container into the railway's system. When Charlie was hired, they were doing about 5 to 10 rail shipments a shift. He was told to copy and paste the information from the railway's webpage into a report, then send a heads-up email at the conclusion of the shift to each of the partner terminals in the respective destination cities. By the time he'd been there 2.5 years, that volume had increased to about 40 to 50 loads a shift. Day shift might handle 3 or 4, and manager and nephew would use the copy and paste routine, but Charlie didn't have the time to do that. His brother was a bit of a techie, so when Charlie noticed that he could export to Excel a report from the rail yard site, he got his brother to write a script that would harvest the relevant info and generate reports for each of the cities, and would do it in a few seconds. Charlie approached manager and asked for a position with the company, as it would be a raise and he would get health benefits. Manager dragged his feet and finally said no. Charlie thought about it for a bit, then told manager, "I'm going to be taking 2 weeks off starting Monday. Call the agency and get them to send someone else over." Manager was furious, but he didn't have a leg to stand on. He wasn't Charlie's employer, so he had no authority to deny Charlie the time off. Charlie was in good with the agency, one of their stars. Temp workers aren't the most reliable, so anyone who kept his head down and caused no issues was valued, and the agency backed him up. Charlie had friends on the dock, and they kept him informed. The first problem was that the replacement the agency sent had nothing in the way of experience, and manager had to train him from the ground up. This resulted in many phone calls throughout the evening to manager, which got him more and more cranky as the days went on. The second was the reports. This company was on the West Coast and shipping across the country. Each destination location had a huddle scheduled at 7 a.m. in their respective time zones, where they would review the incoming shipments. The dock would shut down sometimes at 1 a.m., and the new temp needed to get reports out by 3 or 4 a.m., and the copy and paste routine was taking way too long. Which brings us to the third problem: overtime. The temp was running 12 to 14-hour shifts. Manager delegated nephew to work afternoons to help out. That meant manager had to cover nephew's workload as well as his own. Nephew was really not happy either, as he was a sports fanatic and played hockey several times a week. He had to miss his games. Even with nephew on the job, The reports took forever to get out, and there were mistakes made. Temp-controlled freight was sent dry, and in one case, they had to send the dock foreman racing to the rail yard to placard a container before the yard would accept it. After a week or so, Charlie took the opportunity to distribute his resume and put a manager up as a reference. So now, manager was getting calls about Charlie and realized that Charlie might not come back. He was taking flamethrower heat from all directions, and his only way out was to put Charlie on the payroll. By this time, the agency had sent 2 temps to cover what Charlie used to do with the oversight of nephew. Manager called Charlie in for an interview. "Okay, Charlie, we'll put you on the payroll, we'll pay you the same as the agency paid you, and we'll give you benefits." "No thanks, I have other interested companies that are offering more." "Fine, we'll put you on salary and bump it up by 10%. "Again, no thanks. I won't accept a salaried position unless I get to go home after 40 hours. If you need me to stay late, you need to pay me overtime." "How much an hour are you looking for?" "Well, I know what you pay the agency for my services, and right now you have 2 temps working to cover the shift. Tell you what, pay me what you're paying the agency and add the benefits and you have a deal." "What? That's almost double what you were making before." "And that's what other companies are offering. You can cut what you're paying out to the agency by half and there won't be as many freak-ups. Nephew can strap on his skates and you can watch TV all evening without getting phone calls. Or things can continue the way they're going. What's it gonna be?" Charlie got hired on, made a good chunk more money, and as a sweetener, negotiated 3 weeks holidays a year. Well, when you provide substantial value to a company, you want to get paid or rewarded for what you're worth, right? If this was you and you knew that they were trying to throw you under the bus and not give you any benefits, the position, or the upgrades you want, is that enough to burn your bridges that you're going to outright look for another job? Or would you want to pull something similar to what Charlie did here and prove to them that your value is that high that they need to give you these benefits? Let me know in the comments down below which of those two you would want to do. Our next story is by gorwraith, 1 hour of uninterrupted break. Years ago, I was the manager of a small grocery store. I hated it. Bonuses were removed, hours were long, terms of employment were harsh. I took the job to fill a gap in employment and got stuck there for almost a year until I found something else. All that being said, I put solid effort and time into it to get it right despite it being the worst job of my life. I eventually put in my 2 weeks. I was the last of the batch of managers still employed that were in my hotel group. Most got fired for not meeting unrealistic expectations and others just quit because it was so bad. On the last day of my 2 weeks, the district manager was coming by to collect my keys. He was a major part of why the job was so miserable. As DM, he gave us our hours that we could schedule. But since his bonus depended on how well we came in under hours, he shaved off time and made the salaried management work harder. I found out later he was shaving 1 full-time employee from most stores every week. He would always berate us for not working hard enough, even if we were working 80 hours a week. All the while, he was working from home and we could hear his kid in the background of our conference calls. Anyway, last day of work for me, he was supposed to show in the morning. He didn't. It's getting later and I need to eat. I told the assistant manager that if the DM came in while I was at lunch and didn't feel I needed to return for the last hour of my shift to let me know. And then I get his call. At 55 minutes into my break time, he called to let me know that if I didn't return when my break was completed, he would terminate me for job abandonment. So here is where the malicious compliance comes in. Company policy stated that even salaried employees were entitled to 60 minutes of uninterrupted break. If there was an interruption, the 60-minute break was to start over. I informed him of this and told him his call was official business and I would be resetting my breaks and would return in an hour. I spent the next hour shopping for something at the store next to my own and then went over when the hour was up. I walked into the store, and as he started to talk, I told him that according to company policy, I was entitled to a 15-minute break between the end of my lunch and the end of my shift. I promptly turned my back on him and went outside to take my 15-minute break, 15 minutes before the end of my shift. When the break was over, I walked in, gave the key to the assistant manager, and walked out. The DM started to follow me out and started trying to ask me questions about the store. I told him, as a former employee of this company, I felt very harassed by my former boss attempting to follow me to my car, and I would get the police involved if he did not leave me alone immediately. About 2 weeks later, I stopped by the store to see how the employees were and pick up the one thing I had forgotten to take with me. It turns out that the district manager had been in our store for the last 2 weeks every day as the acting store manager, since there was no one left as a manager in any of his stores. Turns out he apparently had no idea how the stores actually worked. He had wanted me to come back from lunch so I could show him how to do my job. I'm glad he showed up so late because had he been on time, I would have been obliged to show him. The day before my post-employment visit, he had gotten a surprise visit at my old store by his boss. She fired him on the spot. He had a company car he was allowed to clean out, but then had to turn over the keys. So there he was, an hour away from home, jobless, carless, and clueless. And I don't quite feel bad for not feeling bad about it. About a month later, about 2 months after I quit, I got a letter in the mail. Inside was a certificate of appreciation thanking me for my year of service and looking forward to the years to come. From a place I had quit a month ago with less than a year of employment. Turns out the DM had put me on unpaid leave instead of accepting my 2 weeks because he was going to get fired if he lost another manager. Isn't there legally some kind of problem with what the DM did there at the very end? You quit. You're not on unpaid leave? That DM should have been fired a long time ago. I hope those higher up than the district manager realized how bad he just completely screwed everything underneath him. Our next story is by Technos. Okay, that'll be 4 weeks. A million years ago, I worked for a leasing company. We leased anything from manufacturing equipment to jets, but our bread and butter was computers. One fine day, a customer calls in to find their salesman is on vacation. They don't like that, not one bit, and after being told that no, they will not be getting the number to his hotel in Aruba, they're passed on to Tommy. Tommy was the freaking new guy, but in a good way. A customer would ask for something and he'd spend 2 days reading white papers, benchmarks, and calling vendors to find the answer himself when there was a guy fully conversant in that technology 2 cubes away. Anyway, the customer wants 16 workstations in a hurry, SGI Octane, dual processor, with 128MB video cards, 4GB of memory, and monitors. They don't care how much it costs, but they need them as soon as possible. Tommy tells them he'll call back in an hour. He needs to speak to the vendors. Vendor 1 will take 3 weeks at least, they're out of stock. Vendor 2 will take 2 weeks and cost 20% more since they'll have to upgrade existing systems. SGI themselves quote 3 weeks. Tommy, for the first time in his life, remembers we had a former executive from SGI on staff and calls him begging for a contract that might make it faster. The exec says, "How about today? We have 20 of them in the warehouse. Sure, they're supposed to go to customer, but that won't be for another 2 months. We can play some games with serial numbers on the lease after the replacements come in." Tommy thanked them and called the customer back. The customer said, "It's been almost 2 hours. Next time, don't promise a deadline you can't meet." Tommy says, "Yeah, I know and I'm sorry. I had to work pretty hard to track down what you need, and well, I've got some good news and some bad news." "You called vendor 1? "Yep, they can't have them to you for 3 weeks. "You call any other vendors? "Vendor 2, they want a markup but can have it in 2 weeks. I also spoke with." "What about the manufacturer?" "I called them too. They also want 3 weeks, but we have." "How much of a markup does vendor 2 want?" 20%, but that doesn't matter because." "Go ahead and order them." "You haven't even heard the." "If I never hear another freaking word out of your mouth, it'll be too soon. Just get it ordered, and I expect paperwork by 8 a.m. tomorrow." The customer paid an extra $250,000 plus interest and fees, and the guys in services got an extra 2 months to play Doom. With the reship delays on the order, they didn't get their machines for 4 weeks. Maybe let the salesperson actually finish a sentence before you completely buy into one of their options they present to you. Although I do think it's a little awkward in the way Tommy presented it. They should have just said, "Good news, I've got an order that can come in today." They shouldn't have said, "I've got bad news and good news," and started going through all the no's first. Just give the customer what they asked for. That said, it still falls on the customer's hands. Let the dude finish his sentence. You would have saved 4 weeks and an extra $250,000. And our final story of the day is by CosmosOfTime. Ignore me when I tell you the counterfeit machine is broken. Enjoy $40 in counterfeit bills. So this happened a couple of years ago, and I finally found the right subreddit to post this, so here it goes. I worked at a fast food restaurant, and we had a scanner machine to check if money is real or not. One day, I touched the machine's sensor and noticed that it is still scanning my hand as money. I did this with paper as well and concluded that the machine was broken. During the same shift, I had the one manager that did nothing but sit on her butt all day and only help us with orders if we were behind orders by 20+ minutes. I tell her about the machine and she says she'll check it later. See, I'm supposed to scan a bill that is $10 or $20, and for $50 or $100, I have to give it to a manager to check. A few hours go by and she still hasn't checked it, and by this point, I'm checking every bill that's $10 or $20 by holding it up to a light, which can be seen as rude to a customer. One customer complains to me and calls my manager over. This customer complained how I was discriminating her. I wasn't, and I shouldn't be checking a $10 bill like she's a criminal. Instead of defending me, as the machine was broken and she hasn't checked it, she began yelling at me in front of this customer. I told her that the machine was broken and I needed to check each bill, the same I would if the machine was working. She then, without even checking the machine, said to just use the machine and said, "Who would even use a counterfeit on a $10 or $20 bill?" I decided the argument wasn't worth $9 an hour and just complied. I quickly scanned every bill until I saw 2 shady acting women. The first woman handed me a $20 bill that was obviously fake. I didn't even have to check it. It felt and looked like paper. I decided I would just follow orders and scan it. Since it went off, I put it in the register. The second customer came and handed me a similar counterfeit bill. I did the same thing. Later, when my shift was about to end, my manager counted my drawer and found the 2 counterfeit bills and freaked out at me. I zoned out for most of it, but most of it consisted of her calling me dumb for not noticing this obvious counterfeit and how I'm going to get fired. Well, what actually happened was the regional and general managers called me over to fire me before I told them the story. They then checked the cameras and listened to our conversation about the machine being broken, then concluded that the manager was in the wrong for 1, not letting me check the bills, and 2, telling me to use the machine that I explained was broken. She was then fired, and I saw her working the cash register at a grocery store. Hopefully she checks if she gets any counterfeit bills. Don't you always hate hearing about how these people get into these managerial positions and they're such lazy people? I don't know how it is that they manage to get into these positions. Maybe they're so lazy that they're the only people that stick around in these kinds of places long enough to get those positions. I don't know. Or maybe when they finally make it to that tier of job at these kinds of places, they figure, oh well, now I can take all the time I want off and let everybody underneath me do all the work. Either way, it's just incredibly frustrating. But with that being said, that's all the time we have for today. So, which of these stories was your favorite and why? Let me know in the comments down below. But besides that, if you enjoyed the video, please consider liking and subscribing and turn notifications on if you haven't so you'll never miss an upcoming video. Any little thing that you do helps the channel grow so much more. Whether it's commenting, subscribing, or just watching the video, thank you all so very much for supporting me right here on the Storytime channel. I hope you all have a wonderful day, and I'll see you all next time right here on the Storytime channel.